let's go ahead. We're going to be talking about the second aspect of modifying the controller layer by looking at MVC commands. So MVC commands are, as we've seen in our application section, the way in which we're able to handle the different lifecycle methods over in the portlet world. And so we've created these MVC commands to keep our controller layer a little bit more modular, a little bit more clean. In the past, what we have done is put all of our controller layer logic usually in one class, but all of that logic has been broken up into different parts, different components, different MVC commands. And so we have three big MVC commands that we use within Liferay: the MVC action command, the render command, as well as the resource command. And each one of these commands are implemented as OSGI service components. Now let's go ahead. We'll start with the MVC action command. The action command is used to handle the action phase. And so when we are creating the MVC action command, we're going to be doing so as an OSGI service, and that service is going to be registered as an MVC action command. Now, typically when we create one, we're going to be using the superclass base MVC action command. And we're using the action command typically when we're doing some sort of form submission or manipulating our model entities behind the scenes, whether we want to create, update, delete, and so on. So a couple different examples of using MVC action commands are typical CRUD operations. Whenever we want to subscribe to specific content, maybe a feed of blog posts, for example, or whenever we upload a document within Liferay, an MVC action command is going to help us do all of those different things. Let's take an example here of an MVC action command over in the blogs application. So we start off over on the left-hand side with our JSP, and we're looking for the action URL tag. So with the action URL tag, we can do things like bind it to a button, or this URL can be invoked when a form submit has been triggered. In this case, we are looking for the var upload small image URL. And as we look around, I am looking for it myself. Let's see. So we have Liferay item selector. Let's upload a small image. There it is, towards the bottom there. So upload URL is going to be invoked when the image selector is clicked, right? So click it, right, and it's going to invoke the action URL. The action URL is going to be triggering a specific MVC action command. And the way it does so is based off of the name that we see in the action URL. So the name, blogs, upload small image, corresponds to the MVC command name over in the component. So as we learned earlier, over in the MVC action command, right, we are listening for an action URL coming from a specific portlet with a specific parameter or name. So in this case, we're listening to the blogs portlet and listening for the parameter or the name blogs upload small image coming over from the action URL. So once all of that's been done, we then go ahead and call the do process action method where all of the logic here would be executed. So a good review of what we have seen before. Now moving on to the next type of command, we're going to be taking a look at the MVC render command. And the MVC render command handles the render phase of our portlet or portlet components. And just like the other MVC commands, the render command is also implemented as a component as well. So component used to handle the render phase. And we're using our MVC render commands to render JSPs. And so our MVC render command is going to listen for and respond to portlet render URLs over on the JSP side. So typically we use these MVC render commands to be able to display or show the user interface. Let's go ahead and take a look at an example here. Over in the view.jsp on the left-hand side, we're going to have a specific parameter, and this parameter will have a name value pair. So the name MVC render command is what we're listening for. Specifically, we want the value of MVC render command name. In this situation, it's going to be blogs view. Over on the right-hand side, assuming our parameters match, right, the MVC command name matching with the value of the MVC render command name on the JSP side, those two things match, then we go ahead and work through the render method. And just like with the action command, the render command functions pretty much the same. And the only difference is we implement the MVC render command interface since we are listening or handling render requests. And the resource command. Resource command handles the resource phase of the portlet lifecycle, and just like the other two, we're going to be implementing those as OSGI components. Now, with the serve resource or resource serving phase, there is no other phase triggered. So the serve resource allows us to dynamically serve up or generate or get content without triggering the render phase. So this is all done thanks in part to the way that we handle the resource URL. Some of the common use cases here, autocomplete, typing in a field, you get autocomplete of results. AJAX calls is the most popular, the most common, some sort of CAPTCHA check, and being able to update something without re-rendering or refreshing. So you might have a feed, right? Have that dynamically refresh without actually invoking the render phase. So this works very similarly as we've seen before, right? Only difference here is this is quote unquote a little bit more straightforward. We have the resource URL, and the resource URL has an ID. That ID is what we're going to be listening for over on the component end. So over on the component, we're extending base MVC resource command. So we're listening for resource URLs coming from the microblogs portlet, listening for the parameter MVC command name, and the command name specifically microblogs autocomplete user mentions. We do a recap of this so that we can again get refamiliarized with MVC commands so that we can learn how to override them. So let's take a look at how we can override some of the MVC commands within Liferay. So we first start off with deciding, what exactly are we trying to override? Maybe there's a specific portlet application we want to override. And so once we figure that out, we go ahead and find that specific portlet. We then find the MVC command name that we are trying to tap into or override, and then, override it. So when we're going through the overriding process, we'll create a MVC command. And what we're going to do with that MVC command is up the service ranking. We learned previous section, the service ranking can help us determine which implementation is going to be selected. From there, we then implement the action command interface or superclass or render, depends what we're trying to do, right? And then we deploy and then test it out. So let's go through a very simple example of just that. So in this example that we're going to be covering, we're going to be customizing an MVC command that's for editing our blog entries. So if we want to edit the blog entry, we have to go through an MVC action command in order to do so. Maybe we want to do a little bit extra, but in this example, we'll keep it simple by tapping into the MVC action command so that whenever a blog entry is being deleted, we're going to notify someone and let them know beforehand, right? So very simple example here. So we first start off by finding the blogs web bundle. Blogs web bundle is where our portlet component is going to be. So looking for that will then correspond what we found in our UI with the source code. Here in this screenshot, you see within our source code for the blogs web, there are a whole bunch of different MVC commands. So we go ahead and try to find the one that we are going to override. Once we find what we want to override, we follow very similar steps that we've done before. We create a template, or we create a Liferay module project using a generic template like API. Right? We then will create a component within our module project. Right? And then we'll go ahead and enter everything that needs to be entered. Right? Since this is going to be an action command in this example, we extend base MVC action command. We found out which command name we're tapping into or trying to override, and which portlet we're going to be listening for. After that, we go ahead and override the method do process action as we would typically do. One of the things we can do though in this situation is we can still call the original one. So what we've done at the @reference is we've grabbed a reference of an MVC action command, and specifically we grabbed the edit entry MVC action command. So we can call the original action after our custom logic is executed. So work through our custom logic, just print in the console, call the original's process action. So let's go ahead and we'll work through an exercise all together. So let's go ahead and jump into our Liferay Developer Studio.